What if I told you one night, just one night, turned an unknown singer into a rock legend and saved a band on the brink of collapse? No hype, no myth. This really happened. When Steve Perry stepped on stage for the first time with Journey, he didn't just sing. He detonated a moment in music history that still echoes in arenas around the world. And the crazy part? Almost no one in that audience knew they were watching history unfold right in front of them. Journey before the spark. In the mid-1970s, Journey was a band in limbo. Formed by former Santana and Frumious Bandersnatch members, they were technical masters. Guitar wizard Neal Schon, keyboardist Gregg Rolie, bassist Ross Valory, and drummer Aynsley Dunbar. They could play circles around most bands on the scene. But there was a problem. Technical skill didn't always translate to hit records. Their first 3 albums leaned hard into progressive and jazz rock territory. The songs were complex, the time signatures adventurous, the solos sprawling. Critics respected them, musicians admired them. But for the average rock fan flipping through the radio dial, Journey's music was challenging. It lacked that one element that could bridge the gap between artistry and mass appeal. Meanwhile, Columbia Records, who had invested heavily in the band, was getting restless. The label saw potential, but wanted radio-friendly songs that could compete with the likes of Boston, Foreigner, and Styx. Executives quietly made it clear, without a change, Journey might not have a future with the label. Inside the band, the mood was mixed. Some members wanted to stay true to their progressive roots, afraid that chasing radio hits would water down their identity. Others recognized the reality of the music business. If they didn't adapt, they'd fade away. The tension wasn't just artistic, it was survival. Then came the turning point. Through industry connections, Columbia discovered a singer who had been bouncing between bands, recording demos, and waiting for his shot. His name was Steve Perry, a small-town kid from Hanford, California, with a voice unlike anything the label had ever heard. Perry wasn't just a good singer. He had that thing, a pure, soaring tenor that could glide effortlessly over the top of a rock band's wall of sound. He could sing with heartbreaking vulnerability one moment and commanding power the next. Columbia believed he was the missing puzzle piece, but convincing Journey wasn't easy. Some band members were hesitant. They had already established themselves as a unit, and bringing in a new frontman felt risky. Perry, however, was determined. When given the chance to audition, he didn't just meet expectations, he shattered them. By the end of that session, there was no denying it. Journey had found their new voice, and soon the world would hear it. Perry joins. The sonic explosion. Steve Perry's first show with Journey wasn't in some massive arena or on live TV. It was at the Old Waldorf in San Francisco, a club that could barely hold a few hundred people. But for those who were there, it might as well have been Madison Square Garden. The band had kept his addiction quiet. Fans in the crowd were expecting the Journey they knew. Long instrumental jams, Gregg Rolie trading off lead vocals, a band still straddling the line between rock and jazz fusion. Instead, as the lights dimmed and the crowd noise dipped to a low hum, a new figure walked onto the stage. Slim build, dark hair, wearing a simple shirt and jeans. He didn't look like a rock god. But the moment he gripped the mic, everything changed. They launched into lights. Perry's voice rang out, pure, golden, effortless. Conversations in the crowd stopped mid-sentence. People turned to each other with raised eyebrows, as if silently asking, "Who is this guy?" By the second chorus, it wasn't just curiosity, it was awe. Neal Schon's guitar soared as always, but now it had something to soar with. Perry's vocals didn't just sit on top of the music, they danced with it, weaving in and out of the melodies like they had always been there. Gregg Rolie's harmonies wrapped around Perry's lines, creating a lush, full sound that Journey had never quite achieved before. Backstage before the show, Perry had been nervous. He knew some hardcore fans might resist the change, but as the set progressed, any doubts evaporated. He hit the emotional high notes of Wheel in the Sky with such conviction that even the skeptics at the back of the room leaned in. By the end of the night, the crowd wasn't just clapping, they were roaring. Perry didn't just win them over, he made them believe they were witnessing the start of something bigger. Word of mouth spread fast. Local papers called him the spark Journey didn't know they needed, and a voice built for the big stage. That night wasn't about fame or chart success yet. It was about chemistry. 5 musicians on stage, and for the first time, everything clicked. And soon, that chemistry would be tested in the studio, where the next chapter of Journey's story was waiting to be written. Infinity's Launchpad. After that electrifying debut, Journey wasted no time getting Steve Perry into the studio. Columbia Records booked sessions for what would become Infinity, and producer Roy Thomas Baker, fresh off his work with Queen, was brought in to help craft a sound that could finally take the band to the next level. The atmosphere in the studio was electric but tense. Perry was the new guy, eager to prove himself, while the rest of the band had to adjust to a completely different way of building songs. Before Perry, arrangements often grew from long instrumental jams. Now, with his melodic sensibilities, the focus shifted to tight structures, catchy hooks, and emotional storytelling. The first track they worked on together was Lights. Perry had written the song years earlier about Los Angeles, but after moving to San Francisco, he changed the lyrics to fit his new home. Neal Schon's guitar glistened under Perry's vocals, and suddenly, Journey had something radio-friendly without sacrificing musicianship. Then came Wheel in the Sky. Built on a riff from Schon and a lyric from bassist Ross Valory's wife, the song became a showcase for Perry's ability to inject drama and urgency into a performance. It wasn't just about hitting notes, it was about making you feel them. Roy Thomas Baker's influence was crucial. He layered Perry's harmonies, giving them that larger-than-life sheen reminiscent of Queen's vocal arrangements. The rest of the band followed suit, tightening their playing to match Perry's precision. For the first time, Journey sounded like they belonged on the same stages as the era's biggest rock acts. When Infinity hit shelves in January 1978, the change was immediate. The album climbed to #1, 21 on the Billboard charts, their highest position yet, and eventually went platinum. Critics praised the newfound focus, and radio stations put Journey into heavy rotation. But the biggest shift wasn't just in sales, it was in identity. Journey had gone from a technically impressive but niche band to a mainstream force. Perry's arrival and Infinity's success weren't just lucky breaks. They were the first proof that this new version of Journey could dominate arenas. And while Infinity was the launchpad, the rocket hadn't even reached full power yet. That would come with the creation of a song that would outlive almost every hit of its era. Don't Stop Believin' emerges. By the time Journey began work on their 1981 album Escape, they were already riding high from Infinity and Departure. But Steve Perry, Neal Schon, and new keyboardist Jonathan Cain wanted more than another hit record. They wanted a statement, something that would last. Cain brought in a phrase his father had repeated to him growing up. Don't stop believin'. It was advice meant for a struggling young musician, but in Perry's hands, it became something much bigger. Perry instantly recognized the emotional punch in those 3 words. They weren't just encouragement, they were a rallying cry. The song took shape in an unusual way. Most hits open with their chorus. Don't Stop Believin' held it back until the very end. Perry loved the idea of making the audience wait for the payoff, letting the verses build anticipation. Schon contributed that unforgettable guitar riff, and Cain's opening piano line was like a beacon, instantly recognizable, instantly uplifting. In the studio, Perry's delivery was meticulous. He didn't just sing the words, he inhabited them. You could hear the grit in his voice when he sang about streetlight people and strangers waiting, as if he'd walked those same streets himself. The band built the arrangement layer by layer, giving it a steady drive without overwhelming the vocals. When Don't Stop Believin' was released, it didn't explode to #1 overnight. It peaked at #1, 9 on the Billboard, Hot 100, a solid hit, but not the runaway smash it would later become. The magic was in its staying power. Over the years, the song refused to fade. It appeared in movies, TV finales, and sports arenas. By the 2000s, it was everywhere, from baseball stadiums to karaoke bars. In 2009, its use in the Glee pilot sent it back into the charts again, introducing it to a new generation. Eventually, the Library of Congress added it to the National Recording Registry, preserving it as a piece of American cultural heritage. But for Perry, the song was always about more than charts or accolades. It was about hope, about hanging on when the odds are against you. And in many ways, the spirit of Don't Stop Believin' was born the night he first stepped on stage with Journey, proving to himself and the world that dreams are worth chasing. Escape, the game changer. By 1981, Journey wasn't just popular, they were on the verge of becoming untouchable. The release of Escape was the moment everything aligned, the right songs, the right lineup, and a fan base that had grown from loyal pockets of listeners into a tidal wave. From the opening blast of Don't Stop Believin' to the closing notes of Open Arms, Escape was a masterclass in arena rock. Perry's voice was at its absolute peak, clear, powerful, and emotionally precise. He could soar on the high notes of Stone in Love, and then strip everything back for the heart-wrenching intimacy of Open Arms, which became one of the most iconic love ballads of the decade. Open Arms was a gamble. Ballads weren't always embraced by rock audiences, but Perry believed in it. So did Kane, who had originally brought the melody from his pre-Journey days. When the band debuted it live, the reaction was overwhelming. Stadiums lit up with lighters, couples swayed arm in arm, and Perry realized they had tapped into something universal. The Escape Tour was a turning point in scale. They weren't just filling arenas, they were selling them out, night after night. The stage shows grew bigger, the lighting more elaborate, but the emotional connection remained the same. Perry had a way of locking eyes with a fan in the crowd and making them feel like the song was meant just for them. Critics who had once dismissed Journey as corporate rock started to change their tune. Escape wasn't just polished, it had heart. And much of that came from Perry's ability to deliver a lyric as if he had lived every word. Commercially, the album was a juggernaut. It hit #1, won on the Billboard charts, sold millions worldwide, and eventually became one of the best-selling rock albums of all time. But beyond the numbers, Escape cemented Journey's identity. This was no longer a band trying to find its voice. This was a band at the very top of their game. And yet, for all the massive tours and hit singles, Perry never forgot that it all traced back to one pivotal night in San Francisco. That moment was still the heartbeat of their story, and it was about to echo louder than ever. The night that echoes forever. Years later, when Steve Perry looked back at his career, the platinum albums, the sold-out tours, the songs sung by millions, it always came back to that night at the old Waldorf in San Francisco. That night he stepped onto a small stage in front of a few hundred strangers and, without knowing it, rewrote the trajectory of rock history. That night wasn't just the debut of a new singer. It was a collision of timing, talent, and raw hunger. Journey was at a crossroads, and Perry was a man who had spent years on the outside looking in. Touring with small bands, recording demos that went nowhere, and almost giving up on music entirely. That hunger bled into every note he sang. When the lights came up, Perry wasn't thinking about chart positions or magazine covers. He was thinking about surviving this one moment, winning over this one crowd. His heart was pounding, his palms were slick with sweat, but as soon as he heard Neal Schon's opening guitar line, instinct took over. The voice that had been waiting in the shadows finally had a stage big enough, metaphorically at least, to hold it. Something happened in that room that couldn't be rehearsed or manufactured. By the third song, the crowd wasn't just listening. They were leaning forward, riding every vocal climb and fall. Perry's tone was flawless, but it was the feeling behind it that cut through. You could tell he meant every word. After the show, the buzz was immediate. Fans poured out onto the San Francisco streets talking about the new guy and how Journey sounded like a different band. The next morning, the phones at Columbia Records started ringing. Local radio stations wanted live recordings. Word spread fast, and by the time Infinity hit shelves, that night had already become legend among those who were lucky enough to be there. For Perry, the memory never faded. Decades later, in interviews, he'd still talk about the way that small club felt, how the air was thick with heat and possibility, how the applause at the end felt like a door finally opening. That night wasn't just a performance. It was proof that he belonged. And for Journey, it was the night they stopped being a promising band and started being a phenomenon. Every sold-out arena, every timeless anthem, every chorus shouted by thousands of voices. They all trace back to the moment Steve Perry first stepped up to the mic and sang his way into history. One night. That's all it took for Steve Perry to go from an unknown voice to the soul of Journey. That night in San Francisco didn't just change his life, it changed rock history. Decades later, those songs still fill stadiums and spark memories. And it all traces back to one moment, one mic, and one man who refused to give up on his dream. If you want more untold stories of music's greatest moments, hit subscribe to Backstage Melody, turn on the bell, and stay tuned, because the next one will surprise you even more.